What do you want to be when you grow up? Now we're going to poll the audience. Raise your hand if you are what you wanted to be when you grew up. I think that's about 10%. We change. Believe it or not, rabbi was on my list. But at the very top of my list was to be the next best Jewish Vin Scully. But dreams do come true a little later than expected. And so in 2021, when the pandemic shut down our in-person programming for a bit, I had the opportunity to launch a podcast, Rabbi on the Sidelines, discussing the intersection of sports and faith. Over the last 4 years, I've interviewed athletes and coaches and owners and broadcasters and chaplains and authors. Some of my guests are even in this room, and some of you will be guests someday. But my question rarely focused on what was happening on a playing field or a court, but it always asked, what is in your heart and soul? I remember asking Rabbi Wolpe for permission to do this. Are you okay with the rabbi talking about sports at Sinai Temple? And he said, Erez, what have you been waiting for? He said, that voice will be needed one day. And indeed it has. A couple of months after that launch, an NBA superstar brought anti-Semitism to Twitter, X. And just a couple days later, it was actually Charles Barkley that called Sinai Temple and asked a rabbi how sports can be not a divider, but a bridge builder between people, between faiths, and between races. And just last Sunday, I sat here on this bima with Peter Palchik, the Ukrainian-born Israeli Olympic medalist in judo. He was the flag bearer in 2024 for Israel in the Paris Olympics. And as he sat on this bima, he told our Nazarian youth fellows and our Barron scholars, our 9th through 12th graders, learning about anti-Semitism and Jewish identity before they go to a college campus. He told us what that moment was like going into an open-air stadium. He said to the kids, it was the greatest day of my life. And it was the scariest day of my life. He told us greatness and fear go hand in hand. And so it was a few months ago that I interviewed Rabbi Dr. Zev Elif. He's the president of Gratz College in Philadelphia. Also the author of a new book called The Greatest of All Time, The GOAT, America's Obsession with Greatness. At first I told him, Rabbi, I don't interview rabbis. And he said, read the book and call me back. And so I read his book, and immediately I understood that his book is why we are here today. Not to argue over Kobe or LeBron or Magic, but to ask ourselves this question. How do we achieve greatness in our lives, even in the face of fear? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in Hebrew it's called the Yamim Noraim. We translate it as the high holy days. But let's look at the literal translation of Yamim Noraim. It can give you two different polar opposite definitions. Yamim Noraim can mean either the days of fear or Yamim Noraim, the days of greatness. Psalm 27, which we have read all month long of Elul, and we will continue to read through the holiday of Sukkot, identifies exactly how Yamim Noraim, the high holidays, can be both days of greatness and days of fear. We read, Adonai is my light and my help. Whom shall I fear? Adonai is the strength of my life. Mi efchad. Who should I be afraid of? The Malbim, the 19th century commentator, explains that there are two different versions of fear. The first is called yirah. It is a physical fear. It's the fear that an Israeli soldier takes into battle when they see their enemy in front of them. It's the fear that we, as Jews in America, in our cities, in this city, fear when we walk down the street if we wear a Magen David outside of our shirt, or a kippah on our head. But that's not the fear that I want to address today. Rather, it's pachad. It also means fear. But the Malbim tells us that this pachad, this fear, is an unknown fear, a fear that we cannot see. It's a fear of what others will think of us. It's a fear of what we will learn if we listen to somebody with a different opinion than ours. In other words, pachad, it's a fear of ourselves. It's a fear that, God forbid, we may actually change. Pachad is the fear that paralyzes us and blocks us from greatness. And so these yamim noraim, the two choices of fear and greatness, live side by side and call us to transform that fear into greatness. As I conceptualize what I wanted to share with you today between fear and greatness, over these last 3 weeks, 3 stories literally happened to me in this physical space that showed us why this building, this organization, this synagogue, this community of Sinai Temple allows us to transform fear into greatness. 2 weeks ago, on the 24th anniversary of 9/11, we as a community hosted Sharaka. It's an organization that was born from the Abraham Accords in 2020. Sharaka in Arabic means partnership, and it builds people-to-people relationships between Jews and Arabs and Muslims and Israelis, between Israel and the Gulf countries. One of our guests was a young woman from Bahrain named Fatima al-Harbi. She told us that the Abraham Accords in 2020 allowed her to fulfill a dream of travel to Jerusalem. She always wanted to go, but she always had a fear that if she could and if she did, what her friends in Bahrain would think of her. And so in 2020, Fatima went to Israel. She was the first non-governmental Bahraini to step foot in the land. And she decided that when she came back home, it wasn't enough. And so when she came back to Bahrain, she began building delegations to go on March of the Living, to bring Holocaust education to her peers in Bahrain. And not only to do it with Muslims, but to do it with Jews. In fact, Jonah Platt, who is here with us from the Being Jewish podcast, was one of those who marched with Sharaka last year through the gates of Auschwitz. But Fatima would not stop there. When she got back from March of the Living, she realizes that if something was going to change in her people, and this world, she also needed to make sure that children could live a different life than she did. That they must live with love and not with fear. And so just 2 weeks ago, Fatima published this children's book. It's called Fatima's Journey to the Land of Abraham. She describes going to each holy site in Jerusalem to pray with the different faiths, with Jews at the Kotel, with Christians at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with Muslims at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Each place she was told that she would not be able to pray at. She went, and she did. And she ends the book with a fill in the blank. She writes, "Will you join me in the journey of peace? What is your wish?" If that was not enough, just 3 days ago, I looked in the front cover of the book that she gave me, and she inscribed it like this. She said, "To Rabbi Sherman, let this book be a reminder that people like me exist in the Middle East, and I will always be with the Jewish people. I will always be with the Jewish people." When I read this, I didn't think of Fatima, but I thought of all of us. How important it is that we say these same words to her, the fear that it took her to say those words. We have to look into our fear in order to say those words too. Because Fatima, there are people like us here who will do this work with you. This book is Fatima's legacy, but this book is Fatima's greatness. As soon as I said farewell to Fatima, there was a phone call to meet two elderly women from Israel. Their names were Cecilia and Hadassah Bau, and they were the daughters of Joseph and Rebecca Bau. These names may not be familiar to you, but when I tell you their story, you will nod your head. Joseph Bau was born in Krakow, and during the Holocaust, the Shoah, he was a prisoner in the concentration camp of Plaszow, where he met his wife, Rebecca. Like millions of other Jews in that time, Joseph had every right to fear, had every right to give up, but like so many Jews of that generation, Joseph convinced himself that fear would not defeat him. Instead, he survived because of humor and because of love. And Joseph had a God-given artistic ability, and he used that ability in art to become the official document forger for Oskar Schindler. And by doing so, he saved thousands of Jews. When his daughters Cecilia and Hadass later in life asked him, "But Abba, why? Why did you stay in that camp of Plaszow when you yourself could forge a document and go out first?" And he answered his daughters, "If I didn't stay and forge those documents for the others, who would?" And so he stayed to the end, when he eventually made Aliyah. And only after he passed away did his daughters find out that when he went to Israel, he joined the Mossad and took part in the formation of the State of Israel. This past week, as his daughters shared their story with me, they gave me a gift, this pack of playing cards. It's a replica of the original, but when you open this deck of cards, it's a little different than the cards that my children play with. Because these cards were written on discarded cigarettes by the Nazis. They're not ordinary playing cards. Instead of a Jack of Hearts, you see a picture with a very big man eating a sandwich. Instead of a Queen of Spades, you see a bride and groom under a chuppah. Instead of a 10 of clubs, you see a baby wrapped in a swaddle. Each picture is a card of an imagined life of a prisoner in Plaszow. And the Baus created these cards, Joseph as an artist in Plaszow, not for himself, but for all the other prisoners that had fear in their hearts and their souls, this pachad, this internal fear. Because when he showed them this card, he knew that one day he would tell them, "You too will go to a restaurant and eat that sandwich. You too will dance at a wedding. And you too, one day, God willing, will have a child." When the Nazis told the Baus that they could not love, that they could not live, that they could not get married, that they could not have children, and they could not live, Joseph and Rebecca Bau chose to live, chose to love, chose to get married, and chose to be happy. Fear, pachad, would not paralyze their transformation to greatness. It's been over 80 years since this deck of cards came into existence. And only today, actually Thursday, the stories of the Bau, artists for Bau, will come to a movie theaters of the major motion pictures across this country. A story that now will transform the next generation from fear to greatness. And after the Baus left, I received one more phone call. This time it was a Zoom. This past Thursday, I met Shira Raziel. Shira is the widow of Yedidia Raziel, who was murdered on October 7th, protecting Kibbutz Kerem Shalom, literally in the backyard of Gaza at the southernmost point. While Yedidia lost his life with one other member of the kibbutz, there were no hostages taken because of his heroic acts, and nobody else from the kibbutz was murdered. Shira is now raising her children, 9, 7, and 4, displaced from their home. I met Shira because of our good friend Aiden Danilafar. I believe he's right over there. You can wave. Aiden's going to be celebrating his bar mitzvah in January. Everybody's invited, right? Yes. And for Aiden's bar mitzvah project, he decided to cook food and to sell it. And each month, he cooks a different item, we buy it, and it goes to tzedakah. But Aiden decided to donate those funds to Friends of the IDF of the After the Shiva program, where he, along with his family and now this entire community, has adopted the Raziel family. And so just on Thursday, we met in my office on Zoom with Shira Raziel. Shira had just returned from a widow's retreat and was on a bus to Jerusalem to recite Tehillim, Psalms, for her beloved husband, Yedidia. After we learned Yedidia's story, Aiden changed the menu and is beginning to cook now the foods that Yedidia and his family loved. Schnitzel and chocolate and other delicacies. But before we signed off the Zoom, I had one question for Shira. I said, I'm going to be standing before our community. What is your message for us? She had to think for a minute, and she said these words. She said, Rabbi, I don't know what to pray for. I don't know what to pray for. But there is one thing that I know we all can do. I know that there is so much fear in our world, she said. But the one thing we can all do is to not be afraid to make ourselves better. We cannot be afraid to make ourselves better. My friends at Sinai Temple, let's not allow fear to stop us from becoming better. Fatima Al-Harbi, Joseph Bao, and Shira Raziel. They never met each other, and they probably don't even know each other's stories. One from Bahrain, one from Poland, and one from Israel. But they all asked that same question, mi efchad. Who am I going to be afraid of? Whom shall I fear? And when they asked that question, their lives changed because they saw a world that could change. And they transformed that fear, pachad, internally into greatness and created legacies for all of us. The story is told of a student of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav who confessed to the rabbi, Rabbi, I am afraid of everything. I'm afraid of failure, people's judgments, and Rabbi, I'm even afraid of disappointing God. Rabbi Nachman asked the student to close his eyes. And the Rebbe asked him, but when you walk in the forest at night, what exactly are you afraid of? And the student said, Rabbi, I'm afraid of the shadows that are in between the trees. Rabbi Nachman replied, but what are the shadows? Shadows are nothing more than the absence of light. The trees, they're the same trees that you see in the daytime, but only your eyes deceive you. Rabbi Nachman told the student, sir, the same is true of your fears. They are the shadows in our minds. True courage is not never feeling fear. It is knowing that the shadows are not real and walking forward anyway. As Jews, we do not declare like some athletes, we are the greatest. Instead, we declare that our fears must propel us to do better and ultimately walk forward with that light. There is no doubt about it. We are living in a world filled with many fears, and I will not promise that those fears will go away after you walk out of this sanctuary or tomorrow or even in this year ahead. We have so many fears. We have fears for ourselves. We have fears for the 48 that need to come home and off this wall. We have fears that we need to feel safe in our homes, in our synagogues, and in our schools. But for 120 years, Sinai Temple has stood strong, not by hiding, but by facing that fear, by asking day after day, mi efchad, who should we be afraid of? What fear must we overcome in order to get to greatness this year? Last night, every news channel was here asking us, are you afraid? They ask us, what about the people that are staying home and not walking into your synagogue? And I wanted to tell them this. Our pews are not filled because we are afraid. Our pews are filled because we want to be here. We desire to be here. Because when we are here, like Sinai Temple has reminded us for over a century, we are greater because we are better. Sunday, just 48 hours before this holiday, I had the honor of being on a Zoom call with President Isaac Herzog as part of his Voice of the People Council. 150 Jewish leaders from around the world that I've met this year, and some of them have come here to grace this bima. I had the honor of asking him the last question before we signed off, and I asked him this. I said, Mr. President, if you were standing in my place on Rosh Hashanah, with Jews around the world, thousands of miles away from you, what would you tell us is your message? And he said this, I quote, he said, Rabbi, tell your congregation we live in a time where we do not have the luxury to be divided. Each of our voices must be heard. Each of us must learn from the other. And each of us, and he meant every one of us, has a chapter in the Jewish story. And so we're here. We're ready to write that story together. What do you want to be when you grow up? Over the last few years, I thought I wanted to be the next Jewish Vin Scully. I dreamed of it, but I was just being myself. I was a rabbi, not calling the score of any game, but calling the score of the soul. That's what we're going to do for the next 10 days. A cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of the soul. We will name the fears that hold us back, and we will ask, what can I do to strengthen myself? So one day when we look back at this moment in Jewish history, when we look back at our lives, we will say that we understood the true essence of Yamim Noraim, living lives of awe, living lives of reverence, and achieving greatness for each of us, and I mean each and every one of us, to be a light unto the world. Shana Tova Umetuka. Should be a sweet and happy new year.